You know what I think? I'm gonna probably go off on a little bit of a different direction here, and not to pile on more of the negatives of pro rel for USL, but I think one of the things that makes pro rel so great in, let's say, like England, for example, as a fan of a lower league side, is the ultimate dream. I'll call it
Yeah.
the ultimate dream to make it to the Premier League. Why? Payday. It's massive. But also the marketing, like you were talking about, the press, people start to learn about the team. Okay, so then let's say you get to the Premier League, you have some years there. What's the next dream? Like you always have something more to aspire to. Okay, you want to win the league. Okay, you've won the league. Now what? Go win the Champions League. Like there's always a next step when it comes to the promotion relegation in Europe. And when it comes to USL promotion relegation, I just don't see there being an ultimate dream. How different is it for USL Championship from USL 1, USL 2? Probably a little bit. I don't think it's where I don't think it's to a point where you're seeing a team from USL 1 being like, I'm so dedicated to this team now because we need to meet our ultimate dream of making it to USL Championship. Because I just don't think it's going to be that much different. I don't think there's it would be like if you brought MLS and USL Championship, USL 1, and you made a promotion relegation system. Now you might be talking about a situation where maybe somebody who's a Lexington fan is like, okay, we have a dream now. Like MLS is that much further ahead financially that like it would be a dream for our club to get to that level and collect those finances, play in the same league as Leo Messi. But I think when it's just the USL sides, it doesn't have that ultimate goal. And I don't think that's going to inspire fans to be like, I have to follow my team that we have to make it to USL Championship one day. And that this isn't me making the argument that we should have pro rel with MLS sides and USL Championship or USL sides, because I think the gap in the financials is still too large, and there's not that loyalty to MLS yet to the point where people will stick around if a team gets relegated.
I love that. I think it's a great point. And I will say that is definitely part of that mindset of taking USL Championship to Division 1 status so that they can have that idea of saying, I can play in a Champions League one day, right? Now MLS has all these big players, but if you can get it to a Division 1 status, you can I think it would take a lot of time, but you could get to where we are now.
Well,
The re
let me
oh,
sorry,
go
I'm
ahead.
going to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Let me ask you this. If you're a player in Europe, you're looking to make a move to the US. Let's say USL sets up USL Championship as now another Division 1 side. And they're in a promotion relegation system with USL 1, USL 2, and then there's MLS who's their standalone league. Let's say everything else is consistent. Players, teams, all that, financials, all that is consistent. If you're a player, which league are you going to go to? Are you going to go to USL Championship side just because there's promotion relegation? Or are you going to go play in MLS where you can make 10 times the money and you can go play with guys like Leo Messi, Sergio Busquets, all these other amazing players, Lorenzo Insigne?
And challenge for international competitions too, right? The only way a USL Championship side right now can get in there is through US Open Cup. Odds are a little bit low, right? Um, Completely agree. Now, again, that is obviously going to be the goal eventually one day, but I don't think I think this is almost the negative of this like American I thing of like, if I want it, I can just go get it. Because now you've got everybody thinking in the second division that they can just be a first division and go, which it's going to set us back, right? Having two Division 1s is likely going to set us back. Again, I'm maybe that's just a prediction, but I have a feeling it will. I do want to move on here because we can waffle, and I don't want to waffle. The biggest part of pro rel and why it's successful, to my knowledge, again, I'm not an expert, I don't claim to be so, is this idea that teams will always survive the drop, always. because the top league pays them out over a period of 3 or 5 years in what's called these parachute payments. What is USL? What do you think is USL's best way to control this? Um, because as we mentioned, they're not bringing in as much money as MLS is. They're not bringing in much money nearly at all. So how do you ensure teams that if you take a drop, you're not going to have to fold or sell?
So I think the benefit here for USL is that I think, and I don't know this for sure, I could completely just be making this up. I haven't really looked into the details of the different USL leagues, but I imagine they're much more similar financially than a change from MLS to USL Championship. So I think a drop from USL Championship or USL 1 to like USL 2 or USL 1 won't be as detrimental to the point where they're like, we need money from the league or we're toast. I mean, there's a chance that you will find a couple teams that can't survive the drop and, financially continue to just dissolve and then eventually the club's just gone. But I think you would see that much more to the point where you would probably need some kind of parachute payment if it were like a Chicago Fire or I should actually pick a bad team, Toronto FC getting
Wow.
relegated.
Yes, love the Chicago love.
Toronto getting relegated down to USL Championship, who now have to somehow pay Lorenzo Insigne, but using USL Championship money. Like they would need, well, first of all, they probably have to sell him.
Right.
But
yeah, I would say, or sell him and then lose the merchandise, lose the fan retention that came just for him.
right. But to your point also before, there's that much lower cap in USL Championship. You have everybody on the roster who's going to be way too expensive for that level. You're going to have to lose like every player on the team, or they're all going to have to renegotiate on smaller contracts. The club would be destroyed. I think obviously you'd have to talk about changing financials in the USL Championship, but that's going to be a very tricky conversation. That's a situation where I think they would need parachute payments. I think in this case, they might be all right without it. So I think it's more even between the levels. So I think it's actually a good opportunity for them to actually implement a pro rail. I'll give another positive. I think it's a positive that they're so close in level that they could make those moves without killing clubs, hopefully.
That was exactly where I was going with it too. Is that we've talked about it. I think we've only talked about pro rel like properly once outside of it, and I think we both agreed that USL was the right place to try it to see if it will work because of how close they are together. Likewise, because USL owns all of them, any sort of TV revenue that comes in can be equally split amongst the 36 teams, or at least to a close enough point where it's, uh, 35, 30, 25. So, I don't know if those numbers add up. They're probably close, but you know what I mean, right? If it's close enough where you're not really feeling that hit, you'll survive. And I think that's likely the way they go about it, or likely the way they should go about it. Um, but I think the real focus is going to be that first year, that first season is going to be massive make or break if they're trying to bring in sponsors, right? Because you're going to need big sponsors to have some sort of change. You're not going to do it based off of the money you have coming in now, because if you were, changes would likely already be made or being announced by now. So this is a really good time for all those pro rel for USA guys to step up and support their lower leagues, because if they don't, I don't see this working. I see this failing, and I don't know what would happen after that. Because if you're putting this gamble in and it fails, what happens to these teams? I don't know. But USL is the right place to do it. You're also talking about having a better chance of getting new owners if you do have to sell. You cannot, I promise you, you cannot find me somebody with currently with the meme. Anybody who has a couple $1,000s would say, yeah, I'd love to spend $500 million on an MLS team and then implement pro rel, right? But the people who actually have that sort of money, you cannot find me a single one of them who's going to buy in a franchise at 500 mil where the valuation instantly jumps to 750 next year and then tell them, oh, by the way, if you have a bad first year, like almost every new team does, your valuation drops from 750 to 20. Not a chance. Not a
Nobody would
chance.
invest.
Right, exactly. However, if you look at something, first of all, as we mentioned, you'll see a lot more people buying into the fourth division, right? Working their way up to a second, whatever, which is awesome. However, you're also going to look at more people more enticed to buy a third division club with the what's the word? With the
The risk,
no, the opposite of the risk.
opportunity.
Opportunity. Thank you. This is why you're the accountant guy. You're good with numbers. Um, with the opportunity to increase your valuation with a much smaller risk if it fails. That is where that whole thing happens. So my last question, unless you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, since so many people are huge fans in the U.S. apparently of this side, I think there's probably a pretty strong reason as to why Ryan Gosling and crew bought into Wrexham, because they could do that at like 100th of the cost that it would take to buy Chelsea. Whereas the risk versus the reward in that case is, okay, the risk is we lose the amount of money we invested in it, which is like 100 or like 1,000 times
I
less
think it was
than if you did.
135th of their combined net worth.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like the risk is that you lose it all, right? Like that's the worst case scenario. You lose it all.
Right.
And that 135th of your worth is gone. The reward is that you get it, you build it all the way up to the Premier League, and now your thing's worth like billions. Uh, Whereas if you do it in the Premier League and you are Todd Bowley and you go buy Chelsea for billions and billions of dollars, the worst case scenario, obviously it's not going to happen to a point where it's going to be zero, but the worst case scenario is Chelsea completely fall apart. The value of the club continues to plummet, and he can go from billions down to like tens of millions, and now he's lost a ton of money. So that's I think, to your point, it would be like nobody's going to invest in MLS, which is the Premier League equivalent in this case, to have their valuation just potentially plummet versus like build up a bit more. Like maybe there's a 200 whatever 100 million potential reward in terms of growing valuation versus if we got relegated, now we drop 450 million in valuation.
Right.
Nobody would do that. That's a stupid investment.
Yeah, it's dumb. And what's funny is, right, I think Ryan Reynolds and the other guy, I don't know who the other guy is. I don't know what his last name is. I know it's Rob Mackle something or other.
Rob McElraney or something. I
Yeah,
think.
I'm fairly certain I read somewhere that they actually had no idea like anything about Wrexham soccer, whatever. They just saw it was up for sale. I was like, oh, that'd be a fun thing to do. And then they bought into it. Then they got into it, which is great, awesome. And I think that's the way you want to do it. The one thing I think we should add before moving on to the end of it is a
Sorry,
lot of people.
can I jump in for a quick second? I said Ryan Gosling before. I meant to say Ryan Reynolds
Oh
for
yeah,
Wrexham owner.
they're all
I
the
I got the Barbie movie on my mind. Clearly,
same.
I've been getting
Yeah.
them confused a lot lately. All right, go
Nice.
ahead.
Um, a lot of people will use Pro-Rel as a like grassroots, and I agree that it is a lot more connected to the grassroots than MLS is. The reason why there's such a massive connection to my estimation in England is because every town has a pro team associated with it, which is physically impossible in the United States. You cannot physically do that, which is why you probably have that disconnect there and why people support state teams versus town teams. And it would be great for the town team to become the state team, right? But you still have that idea. Like if you are somebody who lives in Austin, Texas, and you're supporting Austin FC, and some team from Houston becomes the next, Houston team, and Austin goes down, are you driving all the way out to Houston to go support that team? No, no, you're not. So you have to have that balance too. I think the question really should be how can we grow the grassroots in a more holistic way? But that's a conversation for another time.